consolidate right when you graduate, because what that does is it moves you into repayment with the first month when you start working instead of in November of the year that you graduate. Because if you're doing forgiveness, you want that clock to start immediately when you begin.
Welcome to the Teacher Money Show, the podcast dedicated to helping teachers navigate your unique financial challenges and unlock your financial superpowers. I'm your host, Sean Morgan, a full-time teacher. That's right, I teach every day just like you, and personal financial coach. And I'm here to help every teacher, whether you're a seasoned teacher looking for fresh insights, or a new educator navigating your first paycheck, or you're a teacher with student loan debt trying to pay off those student loans to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life.
The contents of this podcast are informational in nature and are not legal or tax advice, and neither I nor my guests are engaged in the provision of legal, tax, or any other advice. You should not act upon this information without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional.
I'm so excited to have Andrew Paulson on today. Andrew is a fantastic guest. I've talked to him many, many times. And Andrew has a master's degree in accounting and is a certified student loan professional. So we're going to talk all about student loans today. And he enjoys business and finance. He's a co-founder of and lead student loan consultant at studentloanadvice.com. And he's inspired on student loans by trying to help his wife figure out how to pay off her nursing school debt. And he has personally advised over $550 million of student loan debt for more than 1,600 borrowers across the country on how to best manage their student loan debt. So we don't have just a spring chicken in here. We've got an experienced student loan professional here to help us out. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Sean. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you. And I think we need to just start right away with the elephant in the room. Loan payments have restarted, which is probably a big deal for a lot of people. So what does this mean for teachers?
Yeah, so it means, after we had about a 3.5-year hiatus during COVID from March 2020 until September, October of 2023, got to start making your payments, right? Now, there is a little bit of an extra leeway, what's called this on-ramp period of time, but if you can afford to make your payments, you don't want to set this off any longer, for a variety of reasons that I know we'll cover today. But if you have federal student loans, it's time to start paying again, carving that out in your budget. And if you've got private student loans or those that your school offered directly to you that were not outside of the federal program, you've probably been paying on those all along.
So let's just go there right now. You said that there are reasons why you want to start paying those federal student loans as soon as possible. Why is that?
Yeah, one of the big ones is so that you can start seeing your balance go down, right? That's the objective is, I feel like most teachers are really going to go down two paths. They're either just going to pay them off over a, 10-year period of time, or they're going to utilize one of the loan forgiveness programs that are common for teachers that I'm sure we'll cover. But in either of those cases, whether you're just paying it off or you're utilizing some type of forgiveness avenue, generally, in order to progress towards either one of those, you need to be in repayment. So, really don't want to stay in forbearance or any of that deferment where you're withholding payment anymore, because generally all you're doing is just kicking the can down the road, right? And if you do that, usually the loan is starting to grow, accrue interest. So that means on a daily basis, your loan will start to grow again. And the objective is to start to get that down so that you can start building your net worth, right? Because, a lot of teachers, you come out of, school and you've got a little bit of a negative net worth, right? And you want to start working that back to zero, getting back to broke. So
getting back to broke. I love it. So this will show my ignorance on student loans here a little bit. During that 3.5-year period, was interest at 0% as well?
For most student loans, Sean, yes. If you just got the regular old student loans that you took from school and they're federal and they're from the federal government, most of you out there didn't have to make payments and did not have interest. There's two big kind of federal student loans. If you borrowed before 2010, there was a loan program called Family Federal Education Loans. Those were really the only federal student loans that fell outside of the scope of the COVID pause. But for most of you, if you borrow it in 2010 or later, you didn't have to make any payments. So federal were paused. Most private student loans, because there's federal and there's private, and private are usually issued by a commercial, some private type of lender, which sometimes is the same company that does federal student loans as well, because federal servicers, and these lenders, they're not the lender, but they just manage the loans on behalf of the Department of Education. And they, private, they may have given you a month or two of relief, then you probably had to start paying on those. So,
All right, fair enough. That's good to know. I just wanted to, be aware if teachers were in a worse position by not making those payments, or if it's just kind of a holding off to. And were there any benefits over that 3.5 year period beyond not having interest and not making payments?
yeah. So, example, if you have federal student loans and they are direct, during that time, you did not have to pay. But in addition to no payment and no interest, if you're utilizing one of the big, teacher, forgiveness programs, public service loan forgiveness or teacher loan forgiveness, those months, although there was no payment owed, were still counting towards, whichever forgiveness track. So like as an example, if you were a new teacher that started teaching, right when COVID hit in March 2020, for 3.5 years, you didn't have to make payments. And public service loan forgiveness is a 10-year forgiveness track where you have to work for a decade as a public servant or teacher, educator, what have you. And you could have, about 3 of your 10 years done at the end of that time without a payment due. So that's a big, big thing for those of you that are looking into forgiveness.
Yeah, 1/3 of your time, just no payments. That's a huge deal. So let's talk about public service loan forgiveness and teacher loan forgiveness. What do teachers need to know about these two programs?
Yeah, so I think we'll start with, how does one select? Because I think that you hear enough, maybe when you're coming out of school, that it's like, oh, there's these two big loan forgiveness programs, right? And if you owe about $17,500 or less, you can do teacher loan forgiveness, because you just need to be working employed, for about 5 years as a teacher in good standing with your employer, and then that can help cover up to $17,500 in student loan balance. Now you do need to, so you just have to have federal student loans to do that, and so that's a nice program if you have a relatively low balance. If you have more than that, let's say you owe $50,000, let's say you owe 75. Sometimes I work with teachers with 6 figures in student loan debt. Not only did you do undergrad, but you went and got a graduate degree too, because you wanted to specialize, right? That's great. That's where public service loan forgiveness comes into play. Now, it is longer. It's a decade that you got to be working full time or a minimum of 30 hours per week at a school, generally nonprofit, government, which a lot of schools fall within that realm, right? And you may just not know that. And they require you to make payments in what's called an income-driven repayment program, which is generally about 10% of your take-home pay. So let's say that you bring in about $5,000 a month, right? And 400, somewhere in the $300 or $400 per month would be allocated to the student loan payment. And you do that for a decade. And after you've paid for 10 years, whatever the remaining balance is at that point in time, the government waives it, and the balance is forgiven. So if you owe, 75K, 50K or more, that can be really the most effective avenue to pay the least amount towards your loans. Aside from kind of the example, if you owe less than 20 grand, you can do teacher loan because it's shorter, but PSLF has no cap on how much you can get forgiven. Just know that it's a decade instead of 5 years. So.
And just a question about that. When PSLF it's forgiven, are there any ramifications for the forgiveness? I know that some programs have tax ramifications. Does PSLF have that or no?
PSLF is really one of the only ones out there where there is no taxes owed. So let me tell you a quick example. Worked with a teacher a couple of years ago. She had $100,000 and elementary school teacher had never ever applied. And she was in her 50s. She was going to pay all, through retirement. She was going to pay these off, pay these all the way until she passes potentially. We helped with her, worked with her, and she had that $100,000 forgiven within 6 months' time and no taxes owed. Once you have fulfilled the decade of requirement, which does require employment verification, that they're just like, okay, if you're working at this specific school, they just need a little bit of checks and balances to make sure that you are who you say you are, you're working enough hours. So that's one thing that's layered in there, but there's no tax ramifications on that at this point in time. Could the government change this in the future? They could, but those that are already borrowed or already enrolled in this kind of a forgiveness track, there shouldn't be any taxes owed at that point, which can be a big deal. Because if you owe 100 grand and that's what you get forgiven, and you live in California, you might have to pay $40,000 in taxes in the year that gets forgiven, right? So there's no taxes owed on that.
Yeah, that's a big chunk of change to have to come up with if you're in that situation. So we have our teacher loan forgiveness for, if you're under that 17.5, right? And then you have PSLF if you're gonna, get that decade of full-time employment. Is there any reason a teacher should use any other repayment type plans that are out there?
Well, and something that I haven't really alluded to is, those are really the big two, Sean, that I see most. Like, I think sometimes your employer will also offer as a sign-on bonus, as maybe they'll do like tuition reimbursement, or so if you're getting your first job or you're jumping ship, that's something else you can talk about in your sign-on packages. Hey, because they just know most people, the average student loan balance for all, everybody out there is like $37,000. So they know that you probably have student loans. It's very common, right? That's another thing that could come up too, is there are state-based loan repayment assistance programs that sometimes pertain particularly to educators, teachers. But there's also, those where your employer can give you 10 grand a year, right? And frankly, that can be used as kind of a way that you could double dip with one of those other forgiveness programs, teacher loan forgiveness, public service loan forgiveness. So a little something that you could use to kind of supplement that.
All right, that's awesome to know. So any other kind of repayment plan, probably not. I mean, circumstances vary, but if you have like a school-based or a state-based one, maybe you can use that in conjunction with the other ones. That's great. If you have a brand new teacher, just starting, right? And they are in student loan debt, probably $37,000 of loan debt. Let's just say that. What is some advice that they should take to get started on their repayment or their forgiveness debt journey?
Yeah. So first thing is just get some education around this, right? Learn about, listen to shows like Sean's, right? So you can get your arms around the finances, because it can be daunting when you're first getting started and you're getting pulled a million directions. That's the first thing. So then, particular to the student loans, figure out, are you in the camp where you're just going to pay these off over 5 years and maybe do like a private refinance where you can lower your interest rate and just pay it off aggressively? Or are you a candidate of one of these loan forgiveness programs? Okay. And so if your student loans are 40 grand or more, I think you should definitely be looking into one of these student loan forgiveness programs, because they just fall so well in line with what you want to do as a teacher. Okay. The other thing, right when you graduate, consolidate your federal student loans. What that does is it moves you into repayment, when you start your job. And I guess, if you're graduating this May, when you're starting in September, but maybe you're going to kind of get on board a little bit before that to get all prepped up for the year, right? Consolidate right when you graduate, because what that does is it moves you into repayment with the first month when you start working instead of in November of the year that you graduate. Because if you're doing forgiveness, you want that clock to start immediately when you begin, because the income, and when you do that, you'll enroll into what's called an income driven repayment program that we discussed a little bit. But here's the deal. If you didn't make anything the year prior when you were a full-time student, or maybe you were working part-time, payments are going to be made based off of what you made the year prior. And if you made below 30 grand, that's a $0 payment. Okay. But the clock is still moving forward for you. So the big takeaways when you're a new teacher is, really to kind of consolidate your loans right when you graduate, not refinance. Consolidate, which keeps it federal, but it allows you to move into repayment earlier, and it allows you to expedite your track to forgiveness and start the clock for either of the forgiveness avenues.
You said there's a difference between consolidation and refinancing. Can you dive deeper into that difference, and when should a teacher consider refinancing?
Yeah. So consolidation and refinancing are commonly, thought of as the same thing. And when I talk about refinancing, this is having your federal loans be converted into a private student loan. So usually it's in the federal system, and it's 6% interest rate, and you're thinking, I only owe $10,000 on this. I'm just going to pay this off in 4 years before I'd even hit the teacher loan forgiveness. Okay, great, right? You could look to refinance that if you could bring down your interest rate. So these private lenders, they reach out to you. They're going to start reaching out to you like every day. Once you have student loans, you're in their system. Somebody's bought a list that has your name on it, right? And it's just how it goes, right? But so that what it does is it effectively converts a federal student loan into a private student loan. And if you have a couple of federal student loans, you can either do you can move all of them private, or it's really a la carte. So if you got 10 and you want to refinance half of them, you could, but I feel like most people will either keep them all federal or they will go private. Okay, so that's private refinancing. What is consolidation? Consolidation just takes a number of federal loans and it bundles them into really one federal student loan. So it keeps it federal, it just consolidates it, makes it a little more simple. And instead of loans going into repayment 6 months after you graduate, because it has this runway that's called grace period, consolidation allows you to opt out of the grace period and start repayment earlier, which would expedite your ability for forgiveness. So you'd start the clock in July of the year you graduate instead of November.
That's really good to know. Now, I'm just trying to understand the nuances of this. If you have 10 student loans and you have, say, 30,000 total in student loans, could you, refinance half of them to pay them off quicker and then keep the other half and use the teacher loan forgiveness for the 17 and a half of that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that brings into play, how do you decide? Right? How do you decide one way or the other what you're going to do? And I think you first look at your balance, right? And if you're in that boat, Sean, I think if you owe $30,000, that's a good point where you could carve out half of that for teacher loan and you could refinance half of that. Well, let's say you owe 50,000 plus. That's where I think you're going to want to look at the public service loan forgiveness track. I know there's a little more nuance in there. What if you don't want to teach full time and you have other stuff going on? You got family responsibilities, you have, other jobs or, volunteer stuff that you're looking at, because PSLF is strict. You got to be 30 hours per week, really teaching full time, right? To do that. So just know that if you sign up for that, and it's an all or nothing approach where you got to stay a decade employed, right? It can't be 5 years and then you get it prorated, right? So just know that if you're signing up for that, it is 10 years. So
If you worked 5 years and then you took a break from teaching, you worked another 5 years, could you still get loan forgiveness?
yep. So I see this all the time. Somebody says, "Oh, well, I got married and had a kid. I need to take 6 months off." That's fine. You can just pick up where you left off afterwards. So if there is, it does not have to. So they always talk about 120 qualifying payments, and these are cumulative, not consecutive. So yeah, absolutely, you can take time off. Sometimes I see people taking a short hiatus for a year, 6 months, and then you can pick up where you left off.
All right, awesome. This has been awesome. I just have a few more quick questions for you, just to squeeze as much information as I can out of you here. Let's say, you want to repay your student loans, but you also have other financial goals. How do you go about balancing, making those payments towards student loans, but also having long-term financial goals and making, contributions toward those?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Sean, and it's always the dilemma. Do I save more for retirement or my kids' college savings accounts or my mortgage, or do I put it into these student loans, right? And some people will tell you you throw it all into savings or you throw it all into student loans. I like to take a two-pronged approach to do both because there is going to be a time when you're at a student loan debt. But what do you have to show for that when you're talking about your finances, right? You're in your savings, you're in your investment account, your retirement accounts, right? It is imperative that you start doing that as well. Roth IRAs, 403Bs, 401Ks, whatever you have, right? And here's the deal. You can contribute to those types of accounts, retirement accounts, like your regular old 403B, and it's a pre-tax account in a lot of cases. If you contribute there, it's going to bring down what's called your adjusted gross income. So that'll bring down the amount that you have in taxes that year. It'll start building your nest egg. And guess what? It also drops your student loan payments if you're on one of those one of those income-driven repayment programs. So you're getting a triple benefit here. Lower student loan payments, money in your investment account, and a little bit less in terms of taxes. So if you're faced with that decision, please try to make the budget to be able to allocate to savings and student loans at the same time.
Yeah, that's wonderful advice. I love the two-pronged approach. And if you said 30,000 is the cap for having a zero payment plan. So if you can get your income officially under that 30,000 mark, then you can just have a zero payment on those things for the entire time. And let me tell you, as a new teacher, it wouldn't be that difficult to get under $30,000 in payment. So that might be something to consider. I know that you're running low on time, so I just want to make sure we have time for our last two important questions, which is number one, what is your number one tip for teachers to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life?
I mean, I think the point that you just talked about is to start investing early, right? Start investing in that retirement account the first year that you get out. And if you do, you're going to be light years ahead of your peers that are hitting their late 30s, early 40s, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. I think I'm supposed to start investing and start saving, right? Just because it can be hard to meet the demands of life right after you get done with school, right? So I think that is the biggest one. Start investing early and get some financial education. Read a good book, listen to a podcast, go to a conference, something that can help you if you feel like it's just overwhelming, where you can start getting your arms around this.
I love it. That's a fantastic piece of advice. Just get that information that you need and make sure you are applying it by starting to invest early. Okay, last question for you. This one's the easy one. Where can teachers get in contact with you?
Yeah, so we have a website that is dedicated to, helping people out with this stuff. You can go to studentloanadvice.com/TMS. And that's our page that we've set up with Sean, where you can find us, where you can drop us questions, read up on any applicable information.
Yeah, and I would appreciate that, guys. I mean, you can just go straight to studentloanadvice.com, but if you just do /TMS, it benefits me, helps me keep running the show, and you still get to get in contact with Andrew and get every question you could possibly have about your student loans answered and more. So thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure to have you.
Appreciate it. Have a great one. Thanks, Sean.
If you'd like to come on the podcast for coaching, to share an expert opinion, or just to talk about a topic you think is relevant, I'd love to talk to you. Just fill out the form at teachermoneyshow.com/guest. I look forward to talking with you.